So kind of like you, that camera can only take so much at once. So we're looking at the first step in doing history, research, looking at primary sources. That's evidence, like a detective would, right? What changed and why? And are those sources still around, extant? Are they valid? What's the context? Like the Spanish are going to say, we're awesome, we did nothing wrong. And the French hated the Spanish like you people were really bad, right? This legend of the black Spaniards, meaning the bad Spanish. What about non-written sources? What about the native people? Wouldn't it be nice to have sources written by the native people? Well, the Dino-Indian of the Caribbean, look, they didn't need writing. As I said, I've been to an island where we think Columbus showed up. It's beautiful. It's like turquoise water, palm trees, white sand. There might be a couple hundred people living there. Why the hell would you need writing, right? You knew everybody. The older people were in charge, right? There was a lot of oral collective memory. So it didn't mean they were inferior. They didn't live in cities. They didn't wear a lot of clothes. Hell, if you went to Columbus Isle, as sometimes we now call it, you probably wouldn't wear a lot either. It's pretty hot, okay? So let's get away from this inferior and superior dichotomy. So the native people of the Caribbean did not have writing. They had sophisticated lifestyles. They fished in the Atlantic, for crying out loud, and they built boats that could do that. But further inland in Mexico, we did have the Aztecs, who left records like this. Now this is the early 1500s, okay, so a generation or two after Columbus. But here's a mother kind of teaching her daughter how to weave, corn tortillas. Yes, these people, well, their ancestors really invented corn. And then we have people writhing in agony, splotchy skin, pain, puking, plague, right? So what do we know from this type of record, but also just demographic information like population records, meaning forensic, right? You can dig up bones and see what happened. There's a mass epidemic, a widespread epidemic of European diseases. So not Columbus's first journey as far as we know, but the ones soon to come would bring smallpox, okay, a novel pathogen, a pathogen that native people had never encountered before that was highly virulent, really deadly, all right? Europeans, they got smallpox too. So did people of Asia, the peoples of Asia and Africa. And often you'd get it as a toddler, and if you survived, you wouldn't really get it again. You'd have some acquired immunity. This is really awful to say because I have a 3-year-old daughter, right? But when a toddler passes away of disease, they're not the leaders of society, right? They're not your rulers, your economic so-called breadwinners. People have another child in this era anyways, heartbreaking as that sounds. But when smallpox and other European, I will call it, this is even worse term, but old world diseases, hit the native people of America, it was highly virulent among your top echelons, your producers in society. The parents die, and then who's going to take care of the 3-year-olds, right? They might get sick and die too. So that first generation of native people will be really tragic, okay? We estimate that the population of this side of the planet, the Western Hemisphere, was probably about 100 million. That's an easy round off. In 1491, let's say, in 1591, it's about 10 million. So 90 million people. Did they all die? Large numbers did. Others, in a sense, went unborn. Hey, when young men and young women die, they don't have children. So native population will just be devastated, right? Just be devastated, sadly, right? So we need to understand the fuller context, okay? That's moving into the next step, number 2, called interpretation. What does this mean? As we interpret the past, let's be aware of our own bias. You are biased, and so am I, by the time in which you live. Here's one thing that good old German historians left us was a cool word. Zeitgeist, right? Ghost of the times. We are shaped, or maybe even haunted, by the time in which we live. It's really tough to break through that. Which means, if you and I had been alive, and we had been, let's see, on Columbus's crew in 1492, I hate to admit, but we might have acted just like Columbus. Enslaving native people, taking some of them back to Europe to sell, jailing some, awful stuff, okay? So we need to be aware of what we call presentism, which is putting the standards of our I would say more morally advanced, hopefully as a society, applying it to people 500 years ago, right? So Columbus was not woke by our standards, right? He was a man of his era, right? So we need to be careful. Should we tear down statues of Columbus? I don't really care. Just like your Confederate leaders, I would say yes, let's do that. But we also need to understand that those people lived in a very different time than we, okay? What are people 500 years, 100 years from now going to say about you and me? Okay? Those people in the year 2020, early 21st century, what did they do to the planet that our children and, their children and their children are going to do inherit, right? What are they going to damn us for? Easy for us to damn Columbus and his Europeans, contemporary Europeans, I should say really contemporaneous Europeans, of crimes against humanity. But we've got to look in the mirror when we do that, okay? That's a real tricky thing called presentism. So we're actually now asking why to change here. Here's an image. Goodness, I don't remember exactly when this was painted, but certainly in 1892, Columbus is a big hero in the United States. I say especially among the Italian-American community, right? Who were looking for a champion because they were being discriminated. In fact, they were a year off, but in 1893 there was a big Columbian exposition in Chicago, the World's Fair, so to speak. Okay? So Columbus a hero? Well, the zeitgeist changes, right? By the 1960s and 70s, especially within the Native American community, get rid of Columbus, he's like worse than Hitler. I think I'm taking that's a little bit too far, so I would probably put Columbus in a kind of a neutral ground, hoping he just sails away, okay? Columbus was a man of his times. Not too much worse than people in Europe in 1492, but not much better either, okay? So I know that's kind of a neutral or wishy-washy way to interpret Columbus, but it's really tough to break through a zeitgeist, right? So that's really something to think about, like, how can we kind of move morally beyond the time in which we live? Right? That's tough. Very few people can do that. In Columbus's, shortly after Columbus, there was a Spanish priest named Bartholomew de las Casas who I think kind of did that, at least toward Native American people. He criticized and really damned his own people in letters that we have, letters to the king. Dear King of Spain, our people are doing really bad things to Native people. They're innocent children of God. And it had some impact. The king said the Spanish were not allowed to enslave Native Americans, so they just forced them to do labor half a week instead of 7 days a week. I know it's not much of an improvement, but there were people like Las Casas and maybe you who can kind of break through their zeitgeist, kind of show the way to a more advanced, morally advanced future. Third step is called communication. This is when historians create secondary sources, right? So the primary sources, yeah, that's like the Aztec records or Columbus's writing. Secondary source, boom, there you go, give me some money, okay? Secondary sources are created by historians, where they try to explain or recreate the past. Now the book we're using is the 6th edition. What was wrong with the 5th edition or the 4th edition? Well, it's more than just making money. We do ask new questions about the past. We discover new evidence. We discover new ways of finding evidence. DNA analysis right now. Okay, DNA analysis, like kind of the 23andMe stuff. Swab your cheek and send it in. Where did your ancestors come from? That's all new stuff, right? So historians have new ways of analyzing the past. Thankfully, not only with the written record, new questions like what? Where did racism come from? Right? One thing about Columbus's era, there wasn't a lot of racism. These people are weak and we'll take their stuff, but it wasn't based upon skin tone. That comes a bit later. Like, why? Historically, why did racism go up? I'm not sure many historians were asking that question 50 years ago. Well, let me go back a little bit. 60, 70 years ago? That's a somewhat new question, right? So, when historians write down what they've learned, they create secondary sources. Here's a really old book by a guy named Washington Irving. Getting out of the screen right now. And Washington Irving wrote ridiculous things in the early 1800s about how Columbus was the only guy who knew the earth was a sphere, not flat and fall off the edge. That's ridiculous, right? And The educated person knew the earth was a sphere. Thousands of years before Columbus, the Greeks figured out the circumference pretty closely. Measuring shadows of the pyramids. I still can't figure out the geometry there, but they did it, right? So we try to recreate the past in a secondary source. Here's one that I'd read. My kind of, think about the professors I had, right? They were educated in the 70s, maybe 60s. They were kind of radicalized, so I had to read this really radical stuff, like how Columbus was the most evil person ever. Again, I'm not going that far, right? That was this book here. And then I would say today, a more neutral position, trying to understand Columbus is a man of his time. Okay? Should not perhaps be lionized or made into a hero today. That's fair. But I guess we should also say that history is not a binary, right? I'm going to be really critical of things, the Europeans, for example, in this whole age of transatlantic colonialism. But I can't turn it into Europeans good, excuse me, reverse that, John. Europeans bad, native people good. There were some good Europeans. The poor guy swabbing the deck was mistreated by the ship captain, right? What about native people? All good? Well, by our standards, no. The Aztecs, the people with the corn tortillas a couple slides ago, would once in a while ritually sacrifice their enemies by cutting the heart out of the living body. That's a way to terrorize your subjects, the people you conquered, right? So you don't fall into this trap where the native people are always peaceful and the Europeans are always warlike. There's good and bad on all sides, okay? So let's not try to stereotype and lump people into groups. Let's look at the individuals. Because the individuals, we hope, have agency. They can make choices. What else about secondary sources? They're open to peer review. So like our textbook, peer review, what does that mean? Other historians read it and made comments on it. Actually, I did not do this one, but I've done others. Stuff you would never, ever even bother to look at. Keep going, man. Okay, keep going. Keep going. Okay, acknowledge it. It's like, wow, page after page after page of historians who read this and made comments like, hey, you guys messed up on something, or what about, X, Y, and Z. So we call it peer review. You will be historians when you write essays for our class, and I'll do kind of the review, right, when I grade it. Okay, but that's a process. In all disciplines, when you put something out there, other experts have to look at it. In the scientific world, they run the same controlled experiments. They come up with the same results. They support your hypothesis. Okay? We ask new questions. We have additional evidence. But we never have a perfect understanding. Okay? So how does change occur then? Change occurs through... I'm going to try to simplify this. There are certain forces. If we need to write an essay on what caused the Europeans to go across their continent, what were the consequences? You're like, oh my God, where do I even start, right? I'm going to give you like 7 categories to help with those questions. Let's see how these work. Natural forces. Which ways did the wind blow? Which way did the wind blow? Well, it kind of took Columbus from Europe, where am I going? Okay, from Europe, into the Caribbean and back again with the westerly winds, right? Columbus has to go like 3,000 miles. What if the Atlantic was only a mile wide? I guess it would be a river. Someone would have done it before 1492. What if the disease didn't wipe out native people, but instead wiped out the Europeans? Yeah. What if 90% of the Europeans had been wiped out because Columbus brings back a disease? Actually he did. Or other Spanish brought back sexually transmitted disease, but it wasn't that deadly. Certainly not as deadly as smallpox. Political. Columbus is sailing for the king and queen of Spain, right? I should say queen and king of Spain, right? So there's politics involved. He's not just some guy out on his yacht. Economic. What is Columbus after? Trade. He's trying to get to Asia for trade. Cultural. He's going to say he's spreading Christianity and civilization. Columbus and the Europeans by this time have ships that can go across the Atlantic. Native people did not have boats that could go across the Atlantic in any other direction. Europeans had muskets. They had cannons. soon would have muskets, right? Because they're killing each other, right, for a while. They have the technology to kill. Native people did not have metal. Metal was very difficult to find in the Americas due to largely nutritional reasons. Many Native people had not yet settled for a long time. So your Native people had knives, but they were made out of basically volcanic glass. And if I have a piece of volcanic glass and you come at me with a steel European sword, I'm in trouble, right? So the Europeans had the technology. I'm going to throw in their horses. I guess not really technology. But Europeans had horses, Native people did not. Wipe from your memory or your vision of Native people on horses. That's much later. There were no horses in the Americas, and so the Europeans brought them. Actually from the Middle East. Social, a little harder, but European populations going up. Like big brother gets daddy's farm. Brother number 2 becomes a priest. Brother number 3, guess I'm going to go across the Atlantic and try my luck over there. Okay. Agency. This is what I call choice. Choice or agency. Individuals have, we hope, some ability. It's never a perfect choice. You can't just do whatever the hell you want. We're always kind of constrained by structure, right? But within that structure, we have some freedom of choice. Get on that ship with Columbus or not. Treat the Native people with respect or not. Right? Enslave people or trade with them. Right? There's choice on an individual level. And if there's no choice, there's no reason to study history. Right? History helps us to make better choices today. Today, right? You're making choices every single day. I hope you're going to make a choice, if you've not done so already, about voting in November. Choose to get registered, choose to get educated based on objective facts, and go vote. Or mail in your vote, right? If there's still a post office by November. But these are ways you can exercise agency. Right? Be moral in your own universe. Okay? Keep in mind when change happens, it wasn't just one of these things pushing Europeans beyond their shores, really before 1492, 1450s really. It wasn't just one of these things. Many of them often work together. Okay? So change is often multi-causational and sometimes contingent, right? In some ways, it's just luck or bad luck that Native people succumbed to diseases from Europe, Africa, and Asia, and it didn't really go in the other direction, at least not do so with that level of deadliness or virulence. Okay? So sometimes things just depend. All right, so this is why we study history, so we can make better choices. So you can exercise agency based upon the human experience. And I hope you will, right? Look forward to having this class in this, for me, rather unique format. Please email me. I also, I'm going to do a poll, P-O-L-L poll, to see if you guys want to Zoom at some point. It's probably tough to get everyone together on one Zoom call. Right, video conferencing. But there might be a way to get, a bunch of you at one time and the rest of you at another time, just so at least for once we can kind of talk face to face and have a little bit of human interaction, even if it's through digital technology. All right, gang, that is the lecture for today. I'm kind of calling this Wednesday, and I'll put another one out for Friday, Saturday. So we'll try to do 3 of these per week, keep them relatively short. About 15 minutes or so in duration. What else should you do? I'm going to put a thread on our discussion board, and I'll put out some questions. So how do I know people are attending? Please respond to the questions in the so-called thread of our discussion forum. That'll be in Blackboard. I'll put it in the announcement too, so you kind of get a sense of how to use that discussion board. If for some reason it doesn't work, let me know. I gotta be honest, I don't always have the best success with Blackboard's discussion forum. So if it doesn't work, we'll make it work, right? We'll figure it out. Thanks in advance for your patience with this new modality. Really as a result of the COVID pandemic. But the nice thing is, I think I probably have students who are all over the place, right? You don't need to drive to campus. I got students who could be anywhere. You could be in the Caribbean right now watching this. We're lucky you. Okay, folks, you will see me